I would like to welcome everybody to this presentation tonight. We're all looking forward so much to hearing Bridget speak. I'm Sally Laughlin, the chair of the Friends of Green River Reservoir, and we're delighted to be able to present this annual program for you. It's great to have such a good turnout. I especially want to thank our board member, Lisa Demonstone, for having done the registration, which has been amazing. I think she said at last count, we had 280 people signed up. There will be a question and answer session at the end, and would like to have you all post your questions and chat, and then there'll be Bridget will be answering them toward the end. And also, I want to be sure to let you know that Green Mountain Access TV is going to be taping the program tonight. It'll be available on their station, and we'll put that information on the chat box.
I'm very excited to be introducing Bridget today. Bridget is a friend of mine that I really respect and appreciate. Although I suspect if you're here today, you really need no introduction to Bridget Butler, also known as the Bird Diva. And I think diva, it really is the appropriate word to use to describe Bridget in the best possible sense, because if conservation had rock stars, Bridget Butler would really be Vermont's Beyonce. So Bridget reminded me a little while ago that I'm quoted on her website on the testimonial section. So I'm happy to read that text here as part of her introduction. It says, Bridget is the model of a 21st century conservationist, combining citizen science, public engagement, an expert naturalist ability, and a focus on habitat conservation. She truly brings all of the necessary parts together. She connects people to conservation, not just through information, but through a passion for wildlife and ability to make it fun. Bridget has been a naturalist in Vermont for more than 20 years. She has co-hosted the Spring and Fall Bird Show for VPR's Vermont edition with Jane Lindholm for many years. She's done presentations, movies, and documentaries for everyone from local news stations to the Echo Lake Aquarium and Science Center in Burlington. Bridget is a birding guide. She teaches birding classes, is an in-demand speaker and presenter, and today we have the great privilege to have Bridget all to ourselves.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here with all of you tonight. I'm really excited to share this space with 158 people. This is wonderful. So many people are really interested in crows, and that's why you all are here. So I'm curious, I'm going to get you guys to participate a little bit. I would love to know where you are from. So if you just give a little shout out and say hello. In the chat box, what I think is really interesting about this pandemic is now that we can gather online, people can gather from farther away, which is really kind of wonderful. And sometimes from out of state as well. All right, look at all these places coming in. It's really kind of cool to see the reach that the Friends of Green River Reservoir have. And I do hope you'll check out their website and support them in their work in this coming year. So I'm going to click on my screen here. Oh my gosh, someone's from Nantucket. It's like flying by so fast, I can't see. Oh my gosh, someone's here from Hawaii too. Well, you'll have to share about your Hawaii crows because I don't know what kind of corvids you have there. All right, so tonight you guys are all here to join and talk about crows, ravens, and their kin. I think it's a particularly appropriate day, being a little bit dreary and wet and dark out during this time of year. And what I love is that crows become more visible during this time of year, which is one of the reasons why I like to do this talk during the fall. So I want to share with you a little bit about what we're going to talk about tonight. Here are some things. I'm going to try to pull back some of the mystery around this family of birds, particularly crows and ravens. We're going to talk about the corvid family to begin with. We'll talk a little bit about the intelligence of this group of birds. We're going to do crow versus raven, and that's like a little clue to what you might get a little bit later on. I am going to ask for some participation, so keep that chat box someplace where you can type in an answer. We're going to listen to some vocalizations. I've got some little video snippets for you to watch as well. And we're going to wrap up by talking about the Crows in Vermont project, which is an iNaturalist project that I started online to track some of the cool behaviors that crows exhibit during this time of year. All right, so I'm just sliding. I'm going to slide a couple more things around here so I have all my screens set, and we're going to get underway. So let's talk about this family of birds. One of the great things that we can think about when we start learning about birds is how we can categorize them and put them in groups together. So studying families of birds can be really helpful. So the family that we're going to talk about tonight is the one that crows and ravens belong to. It's the Corvidae family, which includes crows, ravens, rooks, jackdaws, jays, and magpies. And we kind of have all of those, well, not all of them represented here, but we'll see a lot of them tonight in my presentation. Some of them we have here in Vermont and some we don't. These birds are medium to large size passerines. These are the perching birds. That's the order that they're in. And they have a robust build. They all tend to have long and strong legs. So that section of the leg that you can see it, standing out past the bird's body is really obvious. They have sturdy bills. And when in flight, you'll see that they have round tipped wings. So those are some of the physical characteristics that tie this family together. There are around 123 species of corvids in the world, and crows and ravens form 1/3 of that family. And for those of you here in Vermont, we have a favorite jay. This includes gray jays too. So not just the blue jay, but the gray jay that we have up in the Northeast Kingdom. So let's talk about some of the other things that make all these birds kind of part of the same family. For the most part, most corvids exhibit monogamy. So when they pair up, they have a very strong pair bond. Although one of the women that I follow who studies crows and other members of the corvid family, her name's Kaylee Swift. She's out in the Northwest. She says we might better describe them and say they mate for life and they're kind of socially monogamous, but they're genetically promiscuous, which means extra pair copulations do happen. They're not unusual, but for the most part, they are going to pair up together. When they do form a pair and they breed, there's cooperative breeding that takes place, which means that offspring from a previous year can actually help take care of the new fledglings from this next year. So they all kind of form this family bond. And you may have noticed this. I notice it in my neighborhood. There's always kind of a pack or a flock or a murder, if you will, a small murder of crows that are hanging out together in my neighborhood. Other things that make corvids like together in this family group is that they're omnivores and they're opportunistic. So omnivorous means that they'll eat just about anything. And so here we see a selection of corvids like blue jay eating what looks like to be some kind of berry. We've got crows eating acorns, a gray jay there feeding on carrion, and that's an Australian magpie that's picking at bugs. One of the other things that we'll notice in terms of feeding is that during the winter months, these birds will form flocks together, and those are typically foraging flocks. And with crows, we're going to talk about another behavior that they do so that they are able to share information about where they're able to find food. Those in the family that eat carrion or dead animals, they actually need something else to open the carcass. So we have these relationships that form between mammals and birds, like ravens. So ravens and wolves have a connection. I would say in Vermont, we could probably say coyotes and ravens and crows have a connection. And you can see here too, gray jays will pick off of carrion that is left behind either by predators, or we can also think of roadkill as an example as well. Most of these birds within this family, we're seeing population increases in them because of food sources that come from us. So things like landfills or dumps or even just trash cans. So they're very, very opportunistic, and they'll take advantage of any type of food source that is around. One of the other cool behaviors along these same lines is that corvids are known to cache food, like stash food in different places. And then they also do something called scatter hoarding. So corvids, especially jays, that scatter hoarding is known as spreading out their stash across the territory rather than putting it all in one place. Some animals are what we call larder hoarders, where they find one place that they go back to over and over again, and that's where they cache their food. And gray jays do this. They actually have trees that they will cache food in, and it's like having a pantry, right? So you put all the food in that pantry in these little nooks and crannies in this tree, and then they'll come back to it over and over again. Corvids are also very sneaky when it comes to this, whether they're caching food or whether they're scatter hoarding. They will try to fake each other out. So they're very social, and especially in the winter, they are feeding together, but they also like to make sure that they're going to get the most food out of the group. So they'll fake stash things. And I've seen this in my own neighborhood. My kids and I were walking to the bus one morning, and we were watching a blue jay hop through a yard and gather acorns from my neighbor's tree. And then it would come down on the ground, and it would hop and kind of fake poke it into the ground. And we noticed it kept coming back up with the acorn. There was another blue jay that was perched in the tree watching. And so that first jay was almost like looking over its shoulder at the jay that was up in the tree, and it finally stashed that acorn in a tree stump that was rotting out. And that is where it finally left that acorn when it felt like that other jay was not watching. Now, these birds can have hundreds to thousands of caches, and this really comes back to something that we're going to talk about in just a little bit, about the amazing brain power needed, not only to be strategic in hiding things, but then to find them again later. So in fact, we have different studies that have shown that cache-dependent species like chickadees or nutcrackers can increase the volume of their brain during the winter time to accommodate extra neural connections. So basically their brain power expands. It's almost like a superpower that they have during the winter so that they can remember these places easier. And it's likely that corvids have this same superpower as well. What's even cooler about this is that it can actually help us in terms of conservation and becoming more resilient and adaptive in the face of climate change. So oaks are one of those trees that are much more climate resistant than other trees. So we can focus on protecting little kind of niches and spots in our woodlands where those oaks are found. And we could also maybe start thinking about how we could put blue jays to use in helping us kind of plant new oak trees, right? Some of you may have been involved before in some oak planting with different conservation organizations. And what's fascinating is that in Germany, the foresters found that if they collected the acorns and they put them out in certain areas where they were interested in having more oak trees, that the blue jays actually did a better job of planting them dispersed across the land, ultimately forgetting where some of them were. And those oaks were much more successful in sprouting than the ones that were planted by people. So it's really kind of interesting to think about maybe a human corvid relationship when it comes to kind of spreading oaks across the landscape. Let's talk a little bit. So Rue said nuthatch or nutcracker. So I think nutcracker is a different, I think they're referring to, and I got to look at my resource. I think they're referring to a type of woodpecker there. So not nuthatch, but a nutcracker, which is a species of woodpecker. Let's talk about how smart these birds are, since they're doing all these cool things like stashing stuff and faking each other out. Crows have really amazing brains. One of the people that have studied crows extensively, his name is John Marsleff. He's a professor of wildlife science at the University of Washington. And he's the author of a couple of books on crows, including The Gifts of Crows. And he calls them flying monkeys because they are so smart. He says all corvids have a relatively big brain for their size, but while a seed storer like a pinyon jay, or here we go, there's that nutcracker again, they have a huge hippocampus, and that's the region that's involved in memory. What's different about crows and ravens is that they're actually more like primates, and they have exceptionally large forebrains, which is the domain of analytical thought. So they have a higher level of sensory processing and flexible behavior. So they can change and adapt to whatever the situation is. All right, Joan says, I understand the Ornithological Society has officially changed the name of the gray jay back to the Canada jay. Yeah, and I haven't changed my language around it yet. Good catch there. So corvid brains actually have the same amount or more neurons in their forebrains than primates with bigger brains. And from the outside, it appears that bird brains are very different, structurally speaking, than mammal brains. But however, a look inside shows many of the prominent parts of the corvid forebrain match up with the cortex of animals. And so these areas play similar roles in the higher cognitive functions, which we're going to talk a little bit more about next. Check this out. One of the things that we've discovered that crows can do is they actually know how to use tools. So this crow here, this is the New Caledonian crow, which is found in the Pacific Islands. And it has been found that it uses tools to remove grubs from logs. 40 other species of crows and ravens may also be able to play around with tools. And what they found is that the New Caledonian crow actually has a face for tool use. They have unusually straight bills. You can kind of see that here, but what you can really see, let me see if I can slide my arrow in here. So you can actually see how far forward the eyes are on this bird. So their depth perception is really different. Their eyes face forward a little bit more than most birds, which is really kind of fascinating. All right, let's check out another one. Here's another piece of research that I just find fascinating. This is from Vermont's own Bernd Heinrich of the University of Vermont. And in 1995, he studied ravens extensively. Actually, John Marsleff got into crows because of some of Bernd's research, and actually moved out to Maine to live with him in the Maine woods and study crows and ravens for a while. So what Bernd discovered in this 1995 study was that ravens had this really interesting ability to basically have insight, right? And insight being like the power or act of seeing into a situation and then problem solving around it. So what he did is, and you could see it in this series of photos. So the raven in this photo is tagged. You could see that little yellow tag up underneath the wing. And that's so that he could tell the difference between individuals, right? When they came to visit him at his study site. And what he did is, this is a stick with a string, and it's got a chunk of meat attached to the end of it. And he left it out for the ravens. And of course, ravens are super curious, right? And this one raven came down and sat and looked at the meat on the end of the string and figured out how to pull the string up with the beak, tuck it underneath a foot, let go, pull up another piece of that string, tuck it under the foot. So basically reel in that piece of meat to be able to eat it. So it did it on the first try too, which is the other amazing thing, is to be able to perform an action without missteps or without a lot of experimentation. What's even more incredible is other ravens started to watch this, and they learned from that first raven what to do. This led to some more incredible research by John Marsleff. Many of you have probably seen this. There is a great I think it was like a PBS special all about this study that John did. Let's see, he studied crows for over 30, has been studying crows for over 35 years. And he's over in Seattle. And so what he did was he sent researchers into this area where the crows were breeding. And they trapped birds with the researchers that had the masks on and banded them and tagged them and took some weights and measurements and things like that. And they only did that with the researchers that had the masks on. The other researchers that came out and observed the birds did that without masks on. So how do you think the crows felt about being handled and trapped and captured? Probably not so good. So guess what happens if you put one of these masks on and you walk across the campus where they were studying these crows? The crows dive bomb you, the crows mob and shriek and yell, and they all come together and point out that person that is in the mask. What's even more amazing is that 5 years after they did this the first time, the crows were still doing this. 10 years after they did this the first time, the crows were still doing this. And what they found is that crows not only learn from their own experience, but they have this way of kind of passing that on to each other. So that goes into this whole social aspect that these birds have with one another. So it's really kind of interesting to see some of this work. Now, Bern Heinrich had Marsleff come and study with him. And what's really fascinating is Kaylee Swift now, who has become very popular online as someone who is studying crows, has studied with Marsleff. So she started with a couple of different crow studies, and now she's on to researching gray jays as well. She has a really fun thing that she does on Twitter once a week that's called Crow or Not a Crow, where she posts pictures and folks guess whether it's a crow or a raven or another type of bird. Here's something else that's really amazing about crows is that they are playful. They have shown multiple ways that they love to play, where they hide things from one another, or they do tricks in the middle of their flight patterns, or they play in water, or like in this video that I'm going to try to show you. Good, it popped up. There we go. All right, everybody, fingers crossed for me that this will work.
Смотри. Вот. С горки катается. Она нас, наверное, это дразнит, балует.
Интересно, в какую сторону они сейчас едут?
Ту. Нет. Она вообще не едется что-то вот.
Здрава.
О, что там получалось?
Мы поедем, мы помчимся на крышечку управления.
Клювом.
Не может захватить.
Хочет еще дальше.
So you could see from that video that that crow was having a really good time with some kind of cap from something, whether it was a bottle cap or a lid to something that it had found. And when you looked at the roof, you could see that that crow had been doing it multiple times, right? So sliding down inclines, hanging upside down from branches. They talk to themselves. They talk like people. They'll even mimic mammals as well. So they're very playful in their nature, and they enjoy play for the same reason that we do, right? It is enjoyable. It releases endorphins and it reduces stress as well. So play is also stimulating their brain to grow. And it has been theorized that corvids have endorphins like humans do and release them when they play. And it also allows them to gain new experiences in a low risk environment that can later be used in situations that might be more stressful. So it's really kind of interesting. This video is from 2012. It actually was in Russia, which is why maybe some of us didn't quite understand what they were discussing, but you could tell the family was having fun watching the crows slide down the roof. Now, there are a number of other videos online that you can Google. If you Google crows playing, there are some more of them sliding down rooftops, sliding down the back of cars. I've even found one where crows are playing with balls, which is really kind of fascinating. Small, maybe like a little bit bigger than a golf ball on a frozen lake. Absolutely fascinating. So, right, this starts all kinds of questions going through your head, and I could try to answer them all, but I won't be able to. So I'm going to turn you on to really two great books that can get you thinking more about crows and ravens by the people that I've been talking about. So John Marsleff, there's Gifts of the Crow, How Perception, Emotion, and Thought Allow Smart Birds to Behave Like Humans. And then Bernheinrich's Mind of the Raven, which is just a fascinating book. And I think really great books to read during the winter time, because I feel like crows and ravens stand out all the more during the winter. So let's shift gears and let's put you to the test of telling the difference between crows and ravens. So we're going to play a little game. I'm going to pull my chat box open a little bit more here. All right. Let's talk about crows and ravens first and get some context, and then we're going to play around and see if you guys can tell the difference between the two. So some of the things that we say that are different about crows and ravens is that one's smaller and the other one's larger, right? We tend to think of crows as smaller and ravens as larger. It's really hard unless you have the two of them right next to each other. So if you want to be able to identify them, we have to start to look at some other things like the bill. The bill can be a big clue. Here you can see the bird on the left has a smaller bill. It's a little bit narrower. The rictal bristles, which are these special feathers that come down the top of the bill, they're not as long as the bill, right? They're maybe just barely halfway, okay, down the length of that bill. Now the bird on the right has a chunkier beak, right? It's wider at the base, and those rictal bristles go out at least halfway and maybe more. So the bird on the left is crow and the bird on the right is raven. The other thing that we can look at that I found really helpful, and it's amazing, even when they're in flight, is I like to look at the throat feathers. So on a crow, the feathers on the throat tend to lay flat and they look very smooth. And on a raven, they tend to look shaggy and they almost stand out like a little bit of a pouch. So that's another thing that you can look for. We'll talk about a couple more things in just a minute. But let's look at where these guys live, guys and gals live. We have common raven, a map on the left, and then American crow is on the right. So the North American ranges of the common raven and the American crow. Here, purple means common in all seasons. That's that deep purple. The light purple means uncommon in all seasons. Red means it's common when breeding. And the blue means that it's common in the winter. And I don't really see any light blue on there, so I'm not going to worry about that. Maybe that is a little bit, nope, there is a difference between the blues there. So light blue means uncommon in winter. These were maps that were drawn up by Ken Kaufman. And so it's really interesting to look at that center swath of the United States and the Southeast, not really super common for the raven, but here in Vermont and the Northeast, it's kind of that stronghold for both. Although I see that Vermont is kind of split in half a little bit there in terms of common in all seasons. All right, let's talk about the type of habitat that they like. Crows and ravens, we find them across the landscape in Vermont. For me, I tend to see ravens in more rural places than I see them in urban. Of course, it's possible. I know that this year we had ravens nesting in the radio tower, like the cell phone tower, right off of Route 89 in St. Albans. And like my favorite place to go see ravens right now is the gas station. And of course they're there because everyone's pulling in for Dunkin' Donuts, throwing out their trash, and the ravens get into it. And it's just, there's overlap, but typically we see ravens in more rural areas, and the crows really do like the urban areas a little bit more. Other things that we can look for that will help us out, please, somebody type the joke into the chat box that I get every single time I do this presentation. Help me out here. You got to help me out. I'm going to wait for it. So we can look at the shape of the wings, and we can also look at the flight pattern. So crows tend to fly in a more straight flight pattern, and ravens tend to do this little bit of a loop thing every once in a while, just a little bit, okay? Flapping versus soaring. So crows tend to flap and ravens tend to soar. We can look at their tails. So the bird on the right in the leftmost picture, actually you could see it in both of these, which is really good. So we can look at a round tail, and I think, let's see if I can get this at the camera right. A rounded tail looks like the letter C, okay? And a wedge-shaped tail looks like that kickstand piece for the R, the leg in the letter R. That's how I remember it. So the wedge tail is raven, R, and the rounded tail is crow, C. No one's gonna, okay, I'll do the joke for you. Okay, what's the difference between a crow and a raven? And you say, I don't know, Bridget. What is the difference between a crow and a raven? And I say, it's all a matter of opinion. Opinion, meaning a pinion feather. So if we count the pinions here, okay, Michael's with me. Michael, can you see my arrow? Can you see the arrow on here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on crow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There you go. There's your next joke for your next party or the next time you see a crow or a raven. Oh, there we go. Duncan Goss had it. He just didn't send it to everyone. I love it. Without fail, somebody knows that one. And it's a great handle and it's funny. Here's the crazy thing about that. That's funny. It makes you laugh. It's releasing like those happy chemicals in your brain, and that's going to stick. That makes it more sticky. So when we have fun with birds, it makes some of these things more sticky and we tend to remember them better. All right, let's do some other stuff. All right, hopping versus swaggering. All right, ravens tend to hop when they're on the ground, and crows tend to swagger, although they'll throw a hop in there every once in a while. So you got to watch them for a while. Ravens tend to be in pairs, but never like hundreds and hundreds or thousands, as the case may be. And their vocalizations are very different. But now I have to tell you that there's one more dark corvid that we haven't talked about, where American crow and common raven may be the most common that we have in North America. There's another one. This one. The fish crow. So fish crows are also found in Vermont and in the Northeast. They're usually found near water. So they've actually expanded northward by following river valleys and different waterways. Here in Vermont, I think we've had, and I haven't looked up my records lately, but I'm pretty sure this is still the only case. We've only had one nesting pair in Burlington, and that was in 1998 at Red Rocks, but we do get fish crows that mix in, especially during the winter flocks that we're starting to see now. And one of the only ways that we can tell them apart from the American crow is by their vocalizations. So guess what we're gonna do next? We're gonna listen to some crows, okay, and ravens, and we're gonna try to tell the difference between the two. All right, so fine tuning your ears to these guys, things that we really want to do. We want to listen to the duration of the vocalization, And for the most part, we are going to group all of these sounds that corvids make as calls. They don't really sing like other perching birds. And honestly, we don't really know a lot about their vocalizations, and we don't have the ability to assign them to things yet because they are so varied right down to individual. So what you really need to do is kind of pay attention to the whole big picture when you're hearing vocalizations and try to put all the little pieces together to figure out what might be going on and why they're calling in that case. So crows typically have a repertoire of 20 to 30 calls. Ravens, it's a lot more. They use it to calls to advertise their presence on the landscape, to acknowledge the presence of others. And they can be very distinct to individual, to a family. A family might have its own language. A pair might have their own vocalizations that they use together. And then you can even go up to neighborhood. So it's really kind of fun to start to study and pay attention, deeply pay attention to these birds. The tough thing is that they're also mimics. So they will mimic each other. They will mimic other birds. They can mimic mammals, and they can even mimic human voice as well. So lots to play around with here. All right, so things that we're going to listen for in our next exercise together is we're really going to listen to the duration and the interval between calls. We're going to listen to the tone. Is it nasally or is it deep down? Is it something that maybe if you were to try to mimic it yourself, you'd be mimicking deep down in your throat or up in your nostrils? Is it a high rattle or a low rattle? Does it have a knocking quality to it? So these are some of the ways that we can describe what we hear from corvids. And of course, like I said, watch what's going around you and then look to see if they are calls that are happening between individuals or if they're more unstructured and they're things like alarms or fight calls or things like that. All right, so let's play around here. This is where you want to have your chat box open. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play 2 vocalizations for you. They are going to be from the same species. And I want you to guess in the chat box whether it's a crow or a raven. Okay. And we'll see how people do. Here we go. All right, I'm going to give you one more. Woo, you guys are quick on the draw. Still think it's a crow. Oh, now we got people saying raven. Uh-oh, 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 uh-oh. We have a split audience. Now what do we do? All right, let's listen one more time. Kathy thinks it's a red squirrel. Still a crow. All right, Karen. Good job, Karen. So both of these are from crow. So we have a higher pitched caw, way up, right? Kind of up high, and a higher kind of cackling kind of sound, clicking sound. So the tone or the pitch is higher, okay? And that, when I mimic it, is right in the back of my throat. It's not down low and it's not nasally either. All right, so we think of it as like a strong, harsh caw, and then a higher tone from that rattly, clicky sound. There we go. All right, on to the next one. Let's try this one. Good job. All right, yes, and now you can hear the difference, right? It's really pretty amazing when you put both of those little audio snippets next to each other. I'm gonna play that one again because it's really short and I love it. There you go. Oh, who just said that? The Raven Tonk. Okay, good. I only know you as owner because you didn't change your name for, for visiting tonight. So someone said the Raven Tonk or the Raven Knock. That's really good. So this is Raven. So deeper, right? You'd get at that caw very down low in your own voice. And then the knocking sound, that tonk or that knock, is definitely Raven. Fun when you listen to them next to each other. Let's do this one. Uh-oh, now what's gonna happen? And I'll do this one. Nice. Yes. All right. There we go. Good job. So this is fish crow. So it's very nasally. It's that. It almost sounds like it's like just choked or something. Not like it's not quite crow all the way there. And then this one is like classic. Like if you hear this, you know you've got a fish crow in that group of It's saying So that's a really good way to kind of locate a fish crow, is through their vocalizations, because visually it's really challenging to tell them apart. So I had a lot of fun with this when I was following different winter roosts that were forming. One time in Burlington, I came across a huge group of crows that were starting to come together for the evening. This was at the end of the day. And I was so excited because I heard this. So I want to make sure, yep, the volume's all the way up. So listen, because it's a cacophony, but something's going to stand out. Okay, bonus points if you can tell me the 3 species that were heard in there. Oh my gosh, I'm going to play it again. Let's try. Okay, crows with a fish crow. And all right, yes, Rue, good job. And a chickadee. And Karen got it too. Good. Good. So you could hear the fish crows in there. And there were, I think there were like 3 or 4 in there. And it took me a while to be able to locate them, but I sat there and kind of tried to like cup my ears so I could figure out where they were. I couldn't tell them visually apart, but there were definitely a nice set of fish crows in there. And that was like one of my first experiences with them, which is so cool. All right. Yes, we already saw that. Let's keep going. So you can have these experiences too. And what is great about this time of year is that crows are exhibiting this behavior that makes them really obvious. So during the winter time, we have this opportunity to see them kind of coming together and roosting. And it's a winter specific behavior. And that is what the Crows in Vermont project is on iNaturalist. So I started, this was like, I think this got started in 2010, maybe. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure it's on the site how long that project's been on there. But I got a lot of questions from people about these crow roosts, and I didn't know anything about them. I hadn't ever really experienced them before. So I started doing a little bit of research and found out about where they were gathering. And then iNaturalist came into play. And I thought, wow, we could crowdsource people to figure out where these winter roost sites are of crows, and just learn a little bit more about where they hop to and from, because they would start one place and then shift one day, and then maybe spend a week or two in another spot, and then totally disappear. And everyone's like, where are they? In fact, I had crows roosting in my backyard for a number of years, until an owl came and took one out, and we had a bloodbath the next morning with crow feathers everywhere and guts hanging off the fence. And my daughter came in with like literally a bouquet of crow feathers, and she was like, "Mom, look what I found." And we went outside, and it was like this mystery to figure out what happened. Turns out we had an owl in the neighborhood, and that's one of the main predators of crows. So roosting doesn't occur year round. It peaks during the winter, although we will see small family groups roosting together. It may occur in rural areas, which is one of the things that I find really fascinating about looking at the map that is developing on iNaturalist from folks putting their observation in. We don't really know if we have rural winter roosts, because most of them seem like they're in more urban areas. So we can think of these roosts as mobile information centers. They're where these birds come together, not only for safety and protection at night, but also to be able to converse with each other and share information. It's also a place where they find mates as well. And if you went out with one of those really cool infrared scanner things, you would see that it also is a way for them to stay warm together during the winter, because the amount of heat that comes off of a flock that's roosting together at night is pretty intense. So it's not completely clear yet how crow roosts are organized. And cohesion, right, seems to be low going in. They all come from different directions into this roost. But what's really interesting is in the morning when they leave, they all seem to go in a similar direction. So it's really kind of fascinating that they disperse back out over the landscape during the day, and then come in from all different directions, and then leave almost as a group in the morning. Pretty cool. Who knows? Maybe you're seeing something different where you are, and that is something that you could totally watch for. So there are a couple things that I've asked people to notice in the project. The first thing is the streaming, and that's that thing where they come in at the end of the day and they're all streaming in. You've probably experienced this maybe once or twice before, especially in Burlington. Middlebury has another big roost as well, where it almost is like this invisible highway over your head, and the crows are following that highway. And if you follow them, you'll find where these little staging areas are before all of these groups get together and roost for the final spot for the night. So we have streaming in the morning and in the evening. We have staging, and when I've chased crows around St. Albans, when they used to roost here in the downtown, there were multiple staging areas. Taylor Park is like the central park on Main Street, and the staging would happen in multiple areas around the city, and then they would all come into the park at night to roost. Vocalizations are happening, so it's really super cacophonous when they are all coming in. And what I think is super cool is if you find that final spot where they're going to be for the night and you hang out there through when the dark gets that inky blue black, right? Like all of a sudden the blue is gone and we're going into the dark blue black color. That's when they get quiet. And it's almost like it all happens at once. And it's the most amazing thing because it's raucous and loud and overwhelming. And then all of a sudden it's like they're like, whoop, that's it. It's time to be, it's quiet time. As I say to my kids, it's quiet time. Let's use our quiet voices. You think the crows are like, let's use our roosting nighttime voices now. We're going to sleep so that owl cannot find us. That's the other thing, safety in numbers in city where there are city lights as well. The other thing I'm going to ask you to do if you want to put stuff on iNaturalist is count crows. And this can be really challenging when there's hundreds, maybe thousands of them. And what you can do is you can start to make little circles visually, right? Like count a group of 10 and then see if you can apply it across, right, that tree that they're roosting in and get an estimate. That's a good idea. When they're streaming, something to do is to time for 30 seconds or 60 seconds and count how many crows come through like a defined space that you might be looking at. Maybe it's between two buildings or it's between two trees, and I'm just going to count for 30 seconds, right? So you could do that, and that will give you an idea of how many crows are moving by if you're counting when they're streaming. Then you go to iNaturalist and you can put it on the Crows in Vermont project. And what's really super cool is that it ends up popping up on a map in real time. So the red ones are the more, is it the red ones are the old ones? I think it's opposite than what it is on eBird. So I think the bluer ones are the newer ones and the red ones are the older ones. So we can see here, we have Burlington, we have a big cluster in Burlington. Here's St. Albans City up here to the north, Montpelier in the center, and Middlebury to the south, right? Those are our big urban areas in this part of the state. And Stowe even had a little pop of set that had roosted. And if we look, I think I put a map for where you guys are. Yeah, look at this. Look at all the data you could add. It'll be pretty amazing, right? So here's Hyde Park, right? And the reservoir is, if I'm right, it's like right in here in this little groove right here. So I don't doubt that Hyde Park, Morristown, Johnson, there might be some crows hanging out there. So who knows? Maybe you'll come upon some crows streaming or roosting this winter, and you can add to the map and your little pin will pop up. So I got to thank Noel Dodge for his observation here in Hyde Park. This is from 2019 in the Hannaford parking lot in Morrisville. So start hanging out in parking lots and looking for crows, and maybe you'll have a fish crow in among them as well. One of the reasons why I love crows is that they are everywhere, and they really are, they are a curious bird, and they make us curious as well. And it's really one of the perfect pandemic birds to build a slow birding practice on. And so my next course, where I'm teaching some different slow birding practices, is coming up in March. This is really all about connecting you with the birds that are right outside your door in a deeper way, and connecting you with the landscape as well. So one of the things that I think is really kind of fascinating about this work, you know, I said that John Marsleff has been studying crows for something like 35 years. And in this interview that he did, it was really interesting that despite this global reputation that he has for his research and all like the scientific vigor that he has put into things, he really hasn't lost touch with the essence of wonder that comes along with his connection with this bird. He really just continues to have fun. And that's what I'm offering you tonight, is a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more context to go and have fun and connect with crows and ravens wherever you are this winter. So I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. You can reach out to me anywhere, birddiva.com, birddiva@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and I have all kinds of online courses, and I am doing in-person things for small groups in a safe way as we navigate through the COVID winter season. But you're all here tonight, and we have a little bit of time for questions. So I am going to unshare my screen and we'll open it up, and maybe Tom can help me. Oh my gosh, like I look at the chat and I was like, there's 22 messages. Tom, you're gonna have to help me. You're like, no, I can't. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna see what I can, okay, here are the ones. Okay, good. Michael, just like
There we go.
virtual
Okay,
high
Sally
five.
just
Okay, wait, he's back.
Okay, so I've been keeping track of some of the questions because people have had fantastic questions so far, and I would love it if people kept adding their questions to the chat here. The first one that somebody said back early on during our conversation tonight, Bridget, is how long do corvids typically live?
Ooh, no idea. I think it all, it all depends on the individual, and it depends on the species. You know, I think birds have a much shorter lifespan than we think they do. And so I think that's probably a pretty easy one to Google.
So
And it looks like I need to do that and put that in my slideshow if it
that's
got asked by
right.
a
So I
lot
did
of
Google
people.
it when I saw that right away.
Yes,
And so I found a couple of birding websites, and they said that for crows, it's about 7 to 8 years. And for a raven in the wild, possibly 10 to 15. So about twice as long.
yeah, I always, you know, with most perching birds, I say 10 years or less, right? It's really amazing, especially with birds that migrate long distances, right? How long they live, right? There's more risks, right? But there's that risk benefit thing in terms of breeding and survival and all of that. And ravens, wow, 10 to 15, that's pretty awesome that can even happen. Very cool.
So here's one that's kind of fun. Somebody asked about crows and ravens' attraction to shiny things.
Ooh.
That does seem to be kind of something that's in the crow and raven lore. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that has to do with play and novelty, right? So I can remember that there was that crazy story of like a crow that was like stealing quarters from some kind of vending machine or something, somehow figuring out how to get the vending machine to short circuit and spit out quarters. And it was taking all the quarters it was a car wash, I think. And it was taking all the quarters and like stashing them just up on the roof. So I think it has to do with play, novelty, right? Just messing around with different objects. I don't doubt as well that, right, like those shiny things are attractive, right? And if you have a nice collection of shiny baubles that you could show a mate, that might make you more appealing, more adventurous and risk-taking, which might be preferred in a mate.
Awesome. So another question that people had is somebody observed that they tend to notice ravens much more at higher elevations. And someone else commented that they tend to notice ravens more out west, like when they're out in the Rocky Mountains or on the West Coast, as opposed to crows. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how kind of ravens partition elevation wise versus crows?
Yeah, I have had that experience too. And I always hesitate to be like, well, it's definitely this, because I've seen ravens break the rule, like the ravens that I talked about by the gas station, and I've seen crows break the rule. I think it would be interesting to go to places with much more extremes in terms of elevation and see how much that holds in those places.
Yeah, interesting. So somebody, I love this question. Somebody asked, they said that they see crows picking at things in the garden and knocking apples off their tree, but clearly not eating them. And they said, is that just play behavior? And I love this part. They said their husband refers to them as juvenile delinquents.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that goes back to the play thing, right? Can I eat this? Is this tasty? What is it going to feel like in my beak? All of those things is just, I mean, think about it. This is very much like babies, right? Babies picking stuff up and they're like, just, doing this, and then it goes in the mouth and then it comes out, right? It's just all of this sensory input that they're trying to get. And what's really interesting is that young crows tend to play more and take more risks than older crows do, because they don't have that depth of experience yet. So this is where that smartness comes into play, right? Like studying crows is really hard because they're very wary of people. And so over time, crows learn that. They know who to be scared of. Hunting crows can be very challenging because of that. So yeah, I think it's all about play and understanding your landscape and where you are. and whether the guy in the house is going to come out and yell at the juvenile delinquents, or am I going to be able to get a little morsel out of the garden or not today?
Yeah.
Maybe if you leave them shiny things, they won't eat the stuff in your garden. Ooh, that'd be fun to
There
play
you
with.
go. So there's a piece of advice for whoever asked that question as a good crow damage deterrent, is just to give them something alternative to play with, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's like the best experiment ever.
So I, that made me think of your experiment with the face recognition. Made me think of so I worked for about a year on a project on ravens out in Wyoming, and we were live capturing and banding ravens. And the person that I was joining the project with said that he couldn't use his car anymore because all the ravens recognized his vehicle. And as we were driving up to where we were, springing off the net to trap and band them, the second they saw his vehicle, they were out. And so we had to start using my car because they couldn't recognize it. So it goes beyond just faces. They can actually even recognize individual vehicles.
And your intent, right? So I've heard just the opposite. So I got contacted by a woman, I think she was here in Vermont. She was feeding crows in a field, and the either the property owner or somebody was like, you got to stop doing this because they're here all the time. But they learned to recognize her car. And so whenever she drove, through that area, the crows would come to her vehicle. So she was asking for some help with that. I was like, oh, that's going to be hard. They know that you have food. It's going to be hard to back away from that now.
So this is a really fun question. Somebody said that a friend of theirs mentioned that there are crows locally where their friend lives in Nantucket that are able to imitate ravens. Now, I'm curious, given how much imitation both of these corvids do, if one might imitate the other, or you think that's just a case of simple misidentification?
Oh, I think it's totally possible that they can mimic each other, because we know that they can mimic so many other things that have very different, right? Syrinx versus larynx, right? And from mammals to birds. And I think that makes me curious about why would that be an advantage? What's the purpose of that? And whether or not they overlap, because they'll chase each other around, and I don't doubt that they don't tend to overlap where they're breeding. And so maybe that's a way of like sneaking into that space where the ravens have set up. It's like, if I sound like a raven and I just stay far enough away from them, they won't notice that I'm smaller and I'm vocalizing like them, so everything will be fine. Right. I don't know, that's just a guess, but right, it gets your all those little questions flowing in your head, and right, spending a little bit more time slowing down. This is like the whole slow birding practice, right? What if you just noticed crows and ravens for the next couple months? What if that was your jam and that's what you got into? Imagine how much you would learn.
I feel like that question that you were just saying, I've observed this funny thing and I wonder if it's a real phenomenon, is kind of the basis of so much great research in science. Somebody out in the field asking that exact question. So do crows imitate ravens, and what would be the advantage of that? And how can we set up a research project to test that? I think that's always really fascinating.
Yeah.
So here's a fun one. Somebody is asking, they said, there's a growing population of ravens in our area. They seem to visit with us as we walk, and I like to think they are saying hello. But is there a way to understand whether they are greeting us as friends or as like an intruder, or as someone who's kind of invasive in their area? So can you tell from crow and raven behavior how they're kind of relating to you?
Ooh, wow, this is another great one. I think, right, you need to look at the context for it, right? And you need to look at the body language, and you would need to look how they're reacting with each other in relation to you. I would talk to them. I would say hi in people voice, and I might even mimic them in their own voices, try to talk back. in the way that they do. We know that people have developed relationships with corvids, crows in particular. There was the little girl out west who left trinkets for a crow that would come and visit her often. And I think it's the way you hold your body, right? And the way are you in hunter searcher mode, or are you in this open mode to be of nature and not a separate from nature, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
I think that could be really cool to play around with. You're lucky that you have a family of ravens hanging out near you.
Yeah, that's a great question, is trying to figure out how they're relating to you. This is kind of a fun one, how they relate to other birds. So this person says, we've watched crows mob hawks. The hawks do not seem to be bothered, staying just far enough ahead. Is this a game? Do you think that the crows are just toying with the hawks, or do you think mobbing is always something that's done of utility to try to get the hawks out of their area to protect their young or things like that?
Yeah, I think mobbing's purpose is a threat, right? That other bird, that other species is a threat to you or to your young. And so they don't, or to your food source, right? So they don't want you in that area. And I feel bad for the birds that get mobbed, because sometimes it's a really big mob, and sometimes like it's just an owl that's just trying to get some sleep. And you're like, the owl's just like, please just leave me alone. I'm not going to do anything to you right now. Doesn't mean that owl won't come back at night, but it's always fascinating to watch that.
Yeah. So another person was asking, I've heard this a couple of times actually in the questions. People are asking about rooks and whether that's just a different name for a crow or a raven, or is that a different species?
I think it's a totally different species, and it's a bird. Anybody know? I'm like, I know there's some experienced birders here. I'm pretty sure rook is in England, and jackdaws as well. It's a totally different species.
I think it's a Eurasian corvid. I don't think it's a North American. Yeah. Yep.
Magpies, though, I wish we had magpies, because I think magpies are so cool.
Yeah. Oh. Yep. Yeah, really neat species. You see them out in the Rocky Mountains. So this is an interesting one. Somebody's asking if crows make a particular sound if they're mourning the loss of one of their brethren. I know that it's seen in primates and some other animal species, elephants and things like that. Have you ever heard anything about birds and corvids in particular displaying any particular things about kind of mourning the loss of an individual of their family or pet?
Yeah, so Kaylee Swift, and I'm just going to put her name in the chat. She has done some extensive research around this, and I think she worked with John Marslove. So her website is, I think it's called Corvid Research. But if you type that in, you'll come up with her website. So she did some really interesting work around mourning, the whole idea that, a dead crow will attract other crows, and it looks like it's some kind of social behavior recognizing that this bird is dead. She's discovered some other interesting, slightly disturbing things about what happens at these crow funerals, including mating trying to happen with the dead crow. So there's all kinds of things that are still being teased apart about what these crow funerals are, and I don't think we completely understand them yet. But she's one of the people that's doing research around that. Again, I don't doubt that there probably are different tones and vocalizations that crows would use in that situation. It just means sitting and studying and spending the time to come up with the way to do that, right? So they had skins of crows that they put out in different spots in order to watch and record some of these different behaviors. So she might have something on the vocalizations there as well.
Interesting. So this is a kind of a fun question.
She is a fascinating follow on Twitter and her blog as well. She posts a lot of really interesting stuff. I think she's a really talented science communicator as well.
Yeah. So Sally Laughlin, I just have to chime in here. Sally is our board chair of Green River Reservoir, Friends of Green River Reservoir, and she writes a really interesting answer to someone's questions because, as somebody else has mentioned, Sally has actually kept ravens in the past. And she says, yes, ravens imitate crows. A VINS permanent resident, so VINS, Vermont Institute of Natural Sciences, which does wildlife rehabilitation, a resident raven acquaintance of mine fooled Dr. Olin Sewall Penigil. I'm sorry, I'm butchering that name, Sally. Once again, years ago, he was a leading ornithologist of the last century. Corvids had heard the crows mobbing the permanent resident owls often and found it amusing to imitate them. So there's our answer to the question before, whether they can imitate each other. So that's really fascinating. So another question that somebody asked was, they'd love a couple of examples of kind of some of the most spectacular signs of puzzle solving, problem solving, or intelligence that you've heard. So you gave that one great example from Bernd Heinrich of them pulling the string up and grabbing the food at the bottom of it. There's one, I'm sure there are many that come to mind, but there's one that comes to mind to me where they were trying to float something to the top of a tube that they couldn't get, and they actually realized that if they picked up the little pieces of rocks and sunk them to the bottom of the tube, it would allow the water to float up to the top and to grab it there. But I'm curious if there are any others that you can think of that are kind of neat like that.
Yeah, like that's the classic, what is it, Aesop's Fables one, right? Like just fascinating that we could tie that into storytelling as well. There aren't any other ones. I was thinking of that same one. If you Google it, you'll come up with a number of other puzzle solving experiments that have been done with crows, which is just really, again, it's just really fascinating what they're able to do.
I know one of the ones that I've read about before is that they will actually hide a piece of food, like a crow in captivity will hide a piece of food while the other crow is watching. And then when it's very deliberately knows the other crow is not watching, it will remove that piece of food and hide it somewhere else. And researchers found that very interesting because it meant that the bird is able to intuit what the other bird is thinking, which is actually a relatively advanced concept that apparently children like ages 3 and 4 sometimes can't even figure that out themselves.
Right. That's awesome.
So one of the ones that I'd love for you to dive into a little bit is how can people contribute to the conservation of crows and ravens? Like what can members of the public do to help conserve crows and ravens and frankly all birds?
Yeah, I think we don't have a lot to worry about with crows and ravens because they're so adaptable and they are able to live in tandem with people, right? They've figured out a way to take advantage of our waste, of the stuff that we leave behind. They're very tolerant of people. They're smart. And at the same time, I think, better understanding what their needs are on the landscape. I think of those places where they can roost during the winter time safely is really important. I know some people have a hard time with the hunting season for crows. And so that is something that if, you feel like is impacting crows, advocating for changes in some of those rules and guidelines might be something that is of interest to you. I think of just intact landscapes, right, for all birds is really important. Contiguous forests that are connected. In our urban areas, where are the woodlands? Like one of the reasons why the crows roosted in our backyard is we have a very small patch, and it's not even ours, it's like multiple neighbors have like a half an acre of woodland that's all connected along the edge of a brook. So in our urban areas, how can we increase the diversity of native plants and trees and shrubs in a way that can connect through the urban area and out into the more rural areas, so animals can move and pass and use that land the way they need to. I think the other piece is just remaining connected with nature. And a lot of us have found our way back to that through this pandemic. When we were quarantined, one of the few safe things that we could do was go outside and be outdoors in nature. I think recognizing that we need nature as much as the animals and plants that we love need the land is really important as well. The roosts, the crow roosts, are magical during the winter time. It's just an amazing, beautiful phenomenon to get out and notice during what can be a really dreary and hard season. So I think there's a lot of light in kind of connecting with crows during the winter time and what they're doing on the land.
That's absolutely right. I love that answer. And I think this has been absolutely fantastic, Bridget. We really appreciate you coming out tonight. Sally, I don't know if you wanted to jump on again, but I just wanted to, thank you, Bridget, for this fantastic presentation. Thank you, everybody else, for being here and for caring about wildlife and about nature enough to spend your Friday night with us learning about really fascinating, interesting birds. And I just want to put a plug out there that Lisa Divenstein, one of our board members, has put a link in there. If you want to become a member of Friends of Green River Reservoir, we'd really appreciate it. We work hard to protect all of the great natural and wildlife and recreational opportunities at Green River Reservoir. And we love it when people join us and get involved. So thank you, Bridget, for all you do for these birds and for conservation. And thank you, everybody else.
I'd echo that. Thank you so much, Bridget. A wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me.
All right. Good night, everybody.